Hello everyone, and welcome to the official All Things Watch podcast, where we talk all things movies, television, streaming, and everything in between. And this is usually where we do our longer format conversation, usually open spoilers and all that sort of thing. So in this podcast, we are going to be talking about the brand new movie Saw X, or Saw 10, tomato. So I will tell you up front that if you have not seen Saw 10, then I am absolutely going to ruin this movie for you, and this is an open spoiler review, and we are going to go into great details about each scene, pretty well every scene of the movie, and all that good stuff. And yeah, so there you have it, folks. You have been warned. If you have not seen Saw 10, I am absolutely going to ruin it for you. So with that being said, you have been warned. Let's go right ahead and jump into our open conversation all about the brand new 10th installment of the Saw franchise, which honestly is probably my favorite franchise in terms of horror. It's probably my favorite horror franchise. Now, I'm a big fan of Hellraiser as well, but Hellraiser just don't quite, scratch the itch, not quite like Saw, just because of how brutal Saw is. And not only that, but most of the people that end up dying in Saw, no matter which movie you look at, typically Jigsaw targets people that are really not that great people to begin with. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they deserve to die, but at least he's not just out randomly, murdering people. He does typically choose his targets very wisely, and I think one thing that this movie, Saw X, does much better than any other movie is it really does an excellent job at really sort of making you sympathize with Jigsaw himself, with John Kramer, and they do a really good job at making you absolutely hate the characters that he's killing. So even though, yes, it's not good that he's killing these people, on the bright side, at least they are like bottom feeders of the earth. They are like scumbags that nobody likes. These people are just straight up evil and wicked and just gross people, and they're ugly inside and out. And these are not the people that these are people that are preying on people that are terminally ill, and and they're stealing their money. So not only are patients going to die with a terminal disease, but they're stealing their money and they're giving them this false hope, which we will get into. But I just wanted to say up front that I really appreciated how the movie really dives into that and really makes Jigsaw in this movie. Jigsaw is much more like an anti-hero as opposed to a straight up hero, because he's not a hero, he's still a murderer, but he's also not straight up a villain in the sense of these people that he's killing are people that are preying on the innocent, the weak, and literally the dying. So these people are robbing terminally ill people and giving them false hope. So let's just go right ahead and jump in. So the movie opens, for the first time ever actually, this Saw movie opens not with one of Jigsaw's contraptions. This movie does not open with somebody about to get killed, although there is a sequence very early on in the movie. Literally, I think it's only it's before 10 minutes. I'm not 100% sure of the exact minute, but it's before 10 minutes in. You do get your first Jigsaw contraption, but the movie does not actually open with a contraption like most of the other movies do. In fact, this movie still opens it opens in a more metaphoric or symbolic sequence, which is, of course, John Kramer himself, or Jigsaw himself, having to get his scans done with an MRI technician, where they're scanning his brain and whatnot. And this is basically where he's learning that he is going to, or that he has a terminal illness, that he has like a brain cancer or whatever it was, that he had a tumor on his brain or something that is, that is going to take his life in time. So to some degree, it is sort of an opening sequence that requires somebody dying, but it's, in this sense, it's Jigsaw himself getting that death sentence, in the sense of finding out and being diagnosed that he has a terminal illness, because Saw 10 actually takes place in between Saw 1 and Saw 2, so it's not technically in chronological order. This, Saw 10 is not a continuation of Spiral or Jigsaw or any of those movies. This movie, chronologically, in terms of the timeline, would actually take place between the first Saw movie and the second Saw movie. So just so you guys have an idea of where this is, I honestly, after seeing this movie, I kind of wish this movie could have very well just been an origin. They didn't even really need to put this in between 1 and 2. This could have straight up just been an origin story. Don't get me wrong, I know that there were other factors that played into the origin of John Kramer becoming Jigsaw, you know, with his family and his child and his wife and all those things. I understand that as well, but they could have put that in this movie, and this would have been an awesome origin for Jigsaw, you know, because they could have put that in there with him losing, you know, the child and having problems with the wife, and then of course ultimately him having a death sentence with a terminal illness, and that all these things put together would have totally been enough to push him over the edge. But anyways, so that's how the movie opens, with him getting the MRI and that scan. And so once he gets diagnosed, he ends up going to what I believe is sort of like a support group, so to speak, for people that have cancer. I think it's like a cancer or a terminally ill, sort of like a support group where you go there and you talk to people, and people talk about their problems and their illnesses, and it's really just a way for to get a bunch of people together who are going through very similar situations. I guess it's, in a sense, it's designed to help people, maybe give people more hope, or maybe help people get through what they're going through. Whatever the case is, you know, it is a support group for people that are suffering. So of course, but while John is in the while he's in this hospital or whatever, or this area that he's in, he actually ends up seeing someone, or he thinks he sees someone, or it looks like he sees somebody that is stealing from the elderly or from somebody else that's terminally ill. And this is you know, the first time that we get an actual contraption in the movie. Like I was saying before, you know, it's less than 10 minutes, but I don't know the exact number. But this is when we get our first sort of contraption where somebody is hooked up to one of Jigsaw's games. And also, this is something else that was only done for the first time ever in the Saw franchise, that this game that we're watching right now, which is actually the game that was in the trailer when the guy has the thing hooked up to his eyes, almost like a pair of goggles. Well, it turns out in the movie that is actually, I wasn't sure if there's going to be something poured into it, or or if there was going to be like rats or something, but it turns out that those tubes attached to the guy's eyes are actually commercial grade, some form of super strong, super powerful suction, almost like a vacuum type thing, which has the capabilities of actually sucking the guy's eyes out. So the idea of this game is that the gentleman in the chair, well, I guess he's not a gentleman if he's a thief, but you get what I'm saying, the person is strapped to the chair. In order for him to escape and not excuse me, and not have to lose his eyeballs, he has a switch in which every time he turns the switch, it breaks one of his fingers. So one hand is hooked up to a machine that would break all of his fingers, and then the other hand he has to use to turn the switch, which would make the machine break his fingers, so to speak. So in order for him to escape, he has to crank the dial all the way to 5, which of course inevitably would end up breaking all of his fingers. Now, what is very unique about this contraption and about this game that Jigsaw has going on right here at the very beginning of the movie, but not the opening, but very shortly after the opening, is that this is the first time that we actually see inside of Jigsaw's mind, because he's not actually doing this. This is just him envisioning what he would like to do when seeing somebody who's stealing from the innocent and stealing from someone who, you know, just doesn't deserve to be robbed. And so even though we do still get to see the game being played, we do get to still see the contraption. It's not literally happening, it's inside of Jigsaw's mind. And I thought that that was really interesting and really a great way of sort of having some character development for Jigsaw and for John Kramer, because it's, you know, it really shows how he thinks. You know, that's what he was thinking. He was thinking about tying that guy to a chair and setting him up to a device that would break all of his fingers and potentially even suction out all of his eyes. So it was just really cool to see him do that, and like, it was really cool to see inside of his mind and to see how Jigsaw really thinks and whatnot. But I'm pretty sure it ends up turning out anyways that the guy that he thought he saw stealing, turns out that you know, the guy actually didn't steal. So it turns out that he did not need to actually go through with it. But I did think it was still cool that when he first sees the guy and he thinks he's stealing, I just thought it was really interesting that, you know, the first thing that came to his mind was that he's going to strap him to a chair and break all of his fingers, or potentially suction out his eyes. And spoiler warning, I don't mind talking about this one because, well, one, it is a spoiler review, but also this happens right at the beginning of the movie. You do get to see basically the worst case situation situation with that game. You do see the guy's eyeballs being suctioned out, and you do see him break some fingers. So so even though it's in his mind, you still get to see the game, you still get to see the contraption, and honestly it was a great opening to the Saw movie. So anyways, moving on, when Jigsaw is going to these support meetings, he ends up meeting the first character, so to speak, that we meet outside of outside of Jigsaw himself, and his name is Henry, and this gentleman is portrayed by Michael Beach, and honestly he did a really good job. He looks really familiar. I feel like I know him from something, but I just can't place it right now, but I do remember seeing him somewhere in another project or another movie or something. But anyways, he approaches Jigsaw in this support group, and he basically tells Jigsaw that there is some hope, because he knows of a place which is not necessarily located in the country that Jigsaw is in right now. It's not like a team or a medical procedure that is offered necessarily in Canada or the United States. He has to leave and go to a foreign country to do this experimental procedure, or this experimental treatment, so to speak, to try and save his life. And this is basically how Jigsaw gets sucked in to being scammed, because I'm sure you've heard most time, even with the non-spoiler reviews, if you were watching any reviews, I'm sure that you've already heard that basically the idea of this movie is that Jigsaw ends up getting scammed. So because of this is why he creates this game. So all of his victims in this movie are people that actually scammed him, and not only him, but obviously lots of other people as well, preying on the innocent, preying on the weak, preying on the terminally ill people. So that's essentially how everything comes about in this movie, is that Jigsaw, or Kramer, ends up getting scammed. And this is how he gets scammed, is by when he's first introduced to Henry, and Henry shows him a bunch of scars that he has and stuff, like on his stomach and on his belly. And so Jigsaw starts to do a lot of research, and he goes to a certain website and everything that Henry tells him about. And so when he goes home, he does all the research on the internet, and he does all that stuff, and he ends up coming across another character who ends up sort of becoming the main character, or I guess you could say the main bad guy, with the exception of Jigsaw himself. This is sort of will be the main antagonist, I guess you would say, of the movie, which is a girl scammer who claims to be a doctor, but really she's just scamming Jigsaw, and her name is Cecilia. So he goes to her website and sees Cecilia and watches the video, and he ends up seeing, and basically this video gives him a lot of hope, because, well, I mean, why wouldn't it give him hope, right? I mean, he was just diagnosed with with a terminal illness, and so he just wants to get better. So he checks out the website that the guy tells him about, and it seems pretty promising. So he really starts to consider it, because despite what he does or what he doesn't do, he doesn't want to die, obviously. So once he sees the video and sees everything, all the information on the website, he, of course, gives Cecilia a call. And this is essentially where the story really starts to begin, and this happens between 10 and 15 minutes into the movie, or maybe even 15 to 20 minutes roughly, but it's still pretty close to the act 1, to the opening act. This is really setting up the movie. And I have to say, this is something else that I really liked about Saw 10, was I really liked the build up to the game, because like I said, they don't just go right into games or contraptions or anything like that in this movie. They really flush out Jigsaw as a character, but they also really flush out his human side a little bit better. And even though he's still obviously a murderer, and we shouldn't root for Jigsaw, really, he's still a bad guy, they really do a good job at showing his ideology and really why he does it. And to some degree, like I said, he is an anti-hero in this movie, more so, or more so than just a straight up villain. But they do a really good job at flushing him out and really showing, like I said, why he does this. So it was really cool seeing that. So he makes the phone call to Cecilia, he packs his bags and gets ready, and he leaves the country, and he goes to find her in her research lab, and sure enough he do. And when he finds her, then she ends up introducing him to all of his team, and he ends up going into their lab, which is in some warehouse. I can't remember, for whatever reason, I just can't remember what country they're in, or where it is they end up going, or maybe they don't even say it all. I can't quite remember. I don't know if he's like down in Mexico or Brazil or something like that. I don't really really know where he's to, but anyways, he's gone somewhere. But he goes into the lab, and everything looks great. You know, Cecilia shows him around, and she's like doing, sort of starts doing all these like fake tests on him, you know, and she does fake MRI stuff on him, and all this stuff, and basically really makes it seem like she's legitimately going to help him. And I think what the idea is, I think what the way it works is that he has to pay her half of the money of however much the procedure is. She requires half of the money right up front, and then the other half will be done after the procedures are done. So now, first of all, it's also important to remember that Jigsaw himself is very intelligent. You know, he's an engineer. I can't remember what kind of engineer, if he's a civil engineer or like a mechanical engineer, or maybe he's a couple of different courses, because he's very intelligent. You know, he's able to build these contraptions and also come up with these contraptions. So, you know, he's really intelligent. He's not a fool, you know. So, even so, right off the bat, you know, these scientists or these medical personnel, or at least these medical scammers, you know, they probably don't even realize themselves just how intelligent, you know, John is. But he meets her, and they show him around. They do some of these tests, which we know are fake, but you know, they really make it believable and whatnot. And of course, while he's there, he ends up making friends with a couple. I think like there's like a child or something there in the town that he ends up making friends with them, and all this stuff. And he starts preparing, and basically they prep him for this experimental treatment / experimental surgery to save him and operate on his brain. And basically, you know, they really want to excuse me, one moment folks, I gotta grab a drink. Okay, yeah, so they start, they prep him and whatnot, and then they actually go in and they start doing surgery. Now, these medical scammers are not just, you know, people that are, you know, backyard scammers. These are like legitimate scammers. They make everything look very real. They have a TV monitor and a TV screen going while doing this procedure on John, and you know, he's able to actually watch the procedure while it's being done. They ask him to move his hands and stuff, and just to sort of make sure, because it is a brain surgery, right? So they do everything to want to make sure that, you know, they're not hurting him or fooling up his brain, and they really make it very believable and whatnot. So they really do a great job at really scamming, honestly. They really are professional scammers. So he's watching the monitor, and he sees the procedure going on. So he's, you know, he's very hopeful, and they're just doing their thing and whatnot. And then, of course, when the procedure's done, he ends up recovering, and he comes to, and she tells him that it's good news and that they were able to cure him. So, of course, obviously, this gives John a ton of hope, and of course, he honors his end of the agreement, and he sends them half of the other half of the money. So now they have, however much this procedure costs. I can't remember if they tell us or not. They probably do, but I just can't really remember. And but either way, he ends up emailing them all of the money that they asked for, and then he basically goes back to wherever it is that he's staying to recover, and he just, you know, he just takes it easy. You know, he's really happy. He's full of hope again now. He's full of life and all this stuff, and he's just really excited and whatnot. But eventually, what ends up happening is he ends up going back to where it was that they wanted to do the procedure, and then he ends up realizing that it was all a scam. He realizes that a lot of the the equipment and everything that was there when he was at this abandoned building getting the medical procedure, he realizes that none of it was real. He realizes that the computer screen that they were which looked like they were operating on with him, you know, he realizes all that was just a recording, and he realizes then that he ended up getting scammed. And of course, this is really when the movie gets really fun and really interesting, because they have no idea who they messed with. They have no idea that Kramer is Jigsaw, and they just scammed Jigsaw, and now he is out for blood, and he starts engineering a new game, obviously, and he starts to, you know, he starts engineering the new game. He starts thinking about, you know, how to get the payback. And what I really liked as well is that when the game comes, he actually ends up doing it in the same warehouse that they did the fake medical procedure on him. So he ends up doing all of the games and everything over there, which was really cool. This is, and something else that was really cool about this movie too, which was different from all the other Saw movies, was that this is the first time that John is actually in the room with them. Well, I guess you could say, with the exception of the first movie, he was in the room with the two people in the bathroom when one of the guys had to cut off his leg. But in this one, you know, although there are recordings, you know, he still does the recordings. In this one, he is actually there observing the game, like literally in front of them, like walking around the warehouse, and he has like a little, almost like a watchtower here, where he's overlooking everybody and all the contestants. So as far as I can remember, this is the first time in any Saw movie that he's actually there while the game is taking place, because oftentimes it's usually like different timelines. Sometimes the Saw movies like to play with different timelines to make you think that one thing is going to happen, but then they sort of pull the rug out from under you. But this time he's actually there in real live time to watch the games. And of course and this is when we end up getting some of our old characters, like Amanda Young, who once again is portrayed by Shawnee Smith. He ends up calling her because she's basically his apprentice, and he says, "Hey Amanda, I need your help. It's time to get these sons of you-know-what for what they did." Now eventually you do end up finding out at the end of the movie that he actually ends up contacting Hoffman as well. If you can remember, Detective Hoffman, who was in a bunch of the Saw movies as well, and was actually a part of the game at some point. I believe he was a survivor. Actually, so was Amanda. Amanda was a part of the games as well. And it was the same actor, I believe, that portrayed Hoffman before, Kostas Mandylor, I believe that you pronounce his name. But either way, they both did a phenomenal job. Everybody did a phenomenal job. Honestly, all the cast, even the people that Jigsaw ends up putting into the games, they all did a great job with their performances. They really did. So anyways, Jigsaw ends up, you know, kidnapping them all and whatnot, and actually the first person he kidnaps was the young guy. What was his name? Honestly, I'm not even 100% sure if they tell us his name. I can't remember, but I believe that he was one of the doctors. He was pretending to be one of the doctors. But anyways, so he ends up kidnapping him, and he ends up getting a lot of information out of certain people as well. And like I said, he has Hoffman investigating them, but we don't really find that out until the end of the movie. But you know, it's still important to know that, because that's how he's able to find everybody. That's how he learns what their real names are and whatnot. And this is essentially when the games finally begin. And this happens roughly about 30 minutes into the movie, roughly, give or take some. Maybe it's like 35 or 36 or maybe even 40 minutes, but it's somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes. So the tension that they did, you know, building up to this game was just so good. Like I said, it was phenomenal. And you do still see stuff, you know, leading up to the game, so it's not like there's no action or no horror or no slasher or no blood and gore up to that point, because like I said, you do get that one game very early on, which is actually in Jigsaw's mind. But they do just such a phenomenal job at flushing out Jigsaw and flushing out John Kramer, that, you know, there's just this huge tension and this huge build-up you know, leading up to the games, and then finally when the games happen, you're like it doesn't feel like it takes a long time, because they do such a good job at building the tension that it's just so satisfying when it finally comes. Like I said, they did a really good job at making us, the viewer, really hate these people that he's about to put through the ringer. So we get to the first game, the first real game, I mean, not like him in his mind or whatever, and this game has somebody, he has somebody tied onto a post, and he has their hands duct taped to the point where I believe he duct taped them like in the form of a fist or something, so they can't use their hands anyways. And he has two knives sticking out of each hand, and on their forearm he has two bombs, basically like miniature pipe bombs attached to each arm. And so obviously in order for them to escape, they're going to have to use those knives, because they don't have their use of their hands and they don't have use of their fingers, so they're going to have to use the knives. This gentleman's going to have to use the knives and literally cut the bomb out of his arm. Now I'm not 100% sure really how Jigsaw had it into his arm. I don't know if it like went right around the bone, or if it just sort of, you know, if it's just like sort of dug into his arm, but whatever way it is, like then again though, I guess where the gentleman is not able to actually use his fingers, so I guess, yeah, I guess that makes sense now that I'm actually thinking about it. But either way, he has to use the knife, and he has to basically cut these things out of his arm. He's cutting through the flesh, through the muscle, and in my opinion, there's no way that he's not actually cutting right down to the bone and whatnot. So anyways, that's what he has to do, and the timer begins, and the gentleman starts to obviously freak out and get really paranoid, because I think at first he's kind of in shock, which would be pretty realistic. I think at first he's kind of like just trying to figure out, like, if this is actually real. Is he really going through this? Like, does he really have to literally cut himself out of this, or is this just, is this fake or whatever? But he ends up doing it. He ends up cutting the 2 bombs off of his forearms, and he kicks them away. Now the bombs do still explode, but he survives. I would assume he actually survives overall, but his arms will never be the same. He'll probably not even be able to use his hands. I would imagine that would have cut through most of his tendons and everything, and all that stuff. So I don't really know what the long-term side effects will be of this, but needless to say, this guy won't be scamming anybody anymore, and he won't be playing Mr. Dress-Up as a doctor anymore, because from what I can tell, he's never going to be able to use his arms again, but he does survive, and he is able to keep his life. Now, in the meantime, while all this is going, we're also getting scenes of Amanda, who's out and about, and she's out collecting the rest of the team and collecting everybody, that basically did him wrong. And I still can't quite remember how much he had to pay for the procedure, but anyways, I do know that eventually Cecilia ends up finding out who Kramer is eventually, like towards the end of the movie. I think she realizes that he is Jigsaw, but anyways, we'll get to that later. So we get to all the scenes where Amanda is out kidnapping a bunch of people, but I think Jigsaw himself kidnapped Cecilia. I don't think that was Amanda. I think that was actually John who kidnapped Cecilia. And then of course we get to the main game now, in which all the characters, or the rest of the characters, are now inside of this warehouse, and they're all chained on, and they are getting ready to play Jigsaw's new game now, and everybody is... I'm trying to think now, this also might be the first time... I'm trying to think, is this the first time that everybody does it together in the same room? But now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think so, because in the actual movie Jigsaw, everybody was wearing the helmets and they were in front of each other as well. But I do think that this might be the first time that, this is the first time that he's actually in the room with them, and he's talking to them, he's walking up next to them, and all this stuff. And of course, each player got something different going on. So one player, in the very first game, before they get into the game, of course, John tells them all about it. He tells them, hey, you guys have, scammed me, and who knows how many other people you've scammed. So this is, he actually says a really good line that I think they say in the trailer too, but I can't quite remember. He says something on the lines like, this is not retribution, this is punishment, or something like that, or this is realization, or something like that, he says. But anyways, he got everybody set up now, and they are ready, and he's ready to start the game. But before, I really liked how they just lingered on the characters, and Amanda's here with him as well, and both Amanda and John are actually just talking to the characters. They're not hid away, they're not behind any glass, they're literally there in the room with these people, and so he starts to turn on the equipment and for the first game, and for the first lady, for the very first game, this girl is, he has her tied on, and I don't know if it's like a barbed wire or if it's some type of specific rope, which is capable of like cutting through bone and everything. And the idea of this lady's game is that if she wants to survive, she only has, I'm not sure what the time limit was, like 5 minutes or a couple minutes, whatever it is, to cut off her own leg using this barbed wire or rope type thing that's able to cut that Jigsaw has there. And then when she cuts off her leg, she needs to take the blood and fill up a vial, and fill the vial up enough so that it's almost like a pressure switch. So once there's enough pressure on the switch from the blood, then it will release her, and it will release her neck. So she starts working on it and really gets into it, and of course once the timer starts, she's just going flat out as fast as she can. She's cutting, and this is an absolutely brutal scene to watch. It's gory, it's bloody, it's exactly what you think it will be for a Saw movie. And she starts cutting and cutting, but of course she still is not able to do it in time. So she does manage to cut off her leg, and she even manages to fill up the vial a little bit with her own blood. She's just not able to do it quick enough, and the machine turns on and it ends up actually hitting her. And that is basically the very first thing that happens. That's the very first game, or the very first victim, I guess, from Jigsaw. So she does not survive. Now, in the meantime, Cecilia ends up taking this dead body and uses like a piece of metal or something or whatever it is that she has there, that she has access to, which is really sharp, and she actually ends up cutting the stomach open of the woman that just got beheaded, basically, and just got killed. And she starts using the woman's intestines as basically using it as a rope to try and retrieve some items in the room. But of course, Amanda comes in and tases her, and stopping her and preventing her from being able to use her cell phone. Now, this also does a really good job at setting up Cecilia's character, or at the very least showing just how cruel the character is, because not only is she bad and evil enough to be ripping off people that are sick and stealing their money and whatnot, but it also just goes to show that she has no disregard for life, because she's so eager and so easily and willing to just cut through a dead body and just literally use their organs for a means of escape. So after that first victim goes anyways, and then after they sort of straighten out Cecilia, now, shortly after that first game, we are introduced to another character named Parker. I believe that was his name, Parker Sears, or something like that. And he ends up coming to the building, or coming to the warehouse where John and Amanda are hosting this game. And he comes in and he claims that he's sort of, on their side, in the sense that he wants to sort of help them or something. So, but at first John can't really trust him. He doesn't really know a whole lot about him, at least not at this moment, or so we think. And what happens is he ends up tying him to the chair, but he basically lets John, or not John, sorry, he ends up letting Parker actually see what's going on. So, he has a bunch of screens and stuff there, so he decides to let him see at least one game of whatnot of what's going on. So then another game, so then the next game then starts, which is then one of the, just somebody else that was a part of that medical team that scammed Jigsaw. So he comes out and he has, he's locked inside of this headgear, or this sort of machinery that's around his head, but what you end up learning is that this thing is full of hot burners, and if he doesn't succeed with what he's supposed to do, and he doesn't get the key to unlock himself and allow himself to escape, what will happen is the burners will turn on and it will basically burn him to death. It will keep burning his face until, I guess, it goes into his brain or whatnot. So in order for him to pass, once again, this involves another pressure switch, but rather than being blood, he must take out his own brain matter, because remember, John was in there getting a bunch of MRIs and getting a bunch of tests done because he has terminal illness with his brain, like a form of brain tumor or brain cancer. So what John has set up for this guy is he has to cut out his own brain matter and then put it in, and then put it into a jar. And when he fills it up so far, then that would release a key or something like that, I believe it is, and then he could use the key to get out. But once again, this person does not survive. But I will say that the scene, watching him go through that, was just absolutely brutal. It was really hard to watch. It was very graphic when the gentleman is basically drilling into his skull, because he has to remove a piece of his skull in order to actually fill up the thing with brain matter. In order to get brain matter, you have to take it from your brain. So that was really bloody and really disgusting and really gory. It's still pretty cool, or well, not cool, but it's still pretty fun to watch. I know all this stuff is not real. It's only special effects and whatnot, so I don't mind saying that it's cool to see in a movie. Obviously, it's not cool in real life, but I thought it was really. It's just really clever, I thought, on behalf of John, to force somebody to go through what he was supposed to go through. He's like, well, you lied to me about saving my brain tumor. Well, in return, now you had to remove pieces of your own brain. So I really thought that was cool. It was pretty clever, and it really suited the story as well, because the whole story is about him being diagnosed and whatnot. So by this time, Parker sees that as well. So he's watching it too, because remember, they got him tied up, and he's watching the the monitors and whatnot, and then they don't waste any more time, really a whole lot of time anyways, and they move on once again to the next game, which is now a game where somebody is basically chained on with basically there's a chain on their opposite arm and their opposite foot. So let's say if their right hand is chained, well then so are their left foot, or their left hand is chained and then so is their right foot. So there's two chains, one on their left hand and one on their right foot, and basically it ends up suspending them, and John has a giant heater set up there, which I think represents radiation, I believe is what he says, you know, because once again radiation is a way of fighting cancer and fighting tumors. So this is another clever way that he's sort of using his own illness and sort of putting that onto these victims. He basically tells her that the only way that she can survive this game is by breaking her own hand and breaking her own leg and removing her hand from these shackles just by simply physically breaking her hand and then, you know, crushing the bones enough so that she can get them out. And if not, then this giant heater is just going to cook her, literally cook her alive. So she does that. Once again, this was a pretty brutal scene, but it was probably one of the lesser brutal scenes out of all the kills in this one. It wasn't quite, you know, as gory or anything like that, because really she's only breaking her hand. Now, although it does, the machine does burn her up quite a bit. Her face does take quite a big beating, or at least takes a lot of burns, but you get what I'm saying. It's not really a whole lot it's not really a whole lot of blood or anything like that. So she ends up breaking her hand and her leg, and of course she ends up escaping. So, you know, although that sort of contraption was pretty cool to see, it wasn't really anything special. You know, we've seen better ones than that. So I didn't really care so much for that scene, but it was still fun to watch. But, you know, like I said, I still think most of the other kills were better. So then something ends up happening where the tides ends up getting turned, because what happens is Jigsaw and Amanda ends up releasing Parker out of these shackles and out of the chains, because remember they had him tied up because they weren't 100% sure if they could trust him. And of course what happens is exactly what they think would happen, is Sears ends up betraying them, and he ends up helping Cecilia, which ends up bringing Jigsaw face to face with his own game. But something else that happens that's not accounted for is that the kid, or the little boy, the little child that Jigsaw sort of become friends with earlier on in the movie, ends up showing up at the warehouse as well, which John did not account for. Now, he did account for these people escaping, which you learn and find out at the end of the movie, which I thought was one of the few things about this movie which I thought were a little bit far-fetched. I mean, don't get me wrong, you do have to suspend your imagination, you do have to suspend reality a little bit and open your imagination, sorry, for a movie, but that was something that even in this world that it built itself, I did feel was a little bit, you know, a little bit like, yeah, right, you know, this is just too much of a coincidence. You know, don't get me wrong, I know that Jigsaw is really intelligent, I know he's very smart, but he can't literally see the future, if you know what I mean. So I just don't feel like he would have, you know, been able to predict the exact situation of what was going to happen. But anyways, there's only a small nitpick. But anyways, so the kid comes in, and then they end up locking the kid to the contraption with Jigsaw, because it was supposed to be Amanda and John, but it ends up being the kid and John. But of course we end up learning that John had that plan the entire time. Now, he didn't have it planned that the kid would be in it, but he did have a plan for him and Amanda, because what happens then is that the cop Sears and Cecilia, they end up going up into the room where they think the money is, and when she takes the bag of money, this activates the final game, which has to take place up there in the office, and it happens between Cecilia and Parker. So then basically only one of them can survive, and the goal is that basically one of them has to kill the other. There's only one air. Basically what he does is he locks them in the room, and then he gases the room, and then the gas, you know, fills up the room, and it is, I don't really know what kind of gas it is, but it does, I guess it does damage to the nerves, or whatever it is. It will kill them if they inhale enough of it. So he has one little hole in the wall where they can stick their head in and get fresh air, but there's only one hole, and it's only big enough for one person, but two of them are there. So they obviously end up having to fight for it, and have to basically, one of them has to kill the other in order to survive. And this is, like I said, this is one part of the movie where I was kind of like, well, I don't know if that would have really happened. You know, it's too much of a coincidence, you know what I mean? I don't know that he could have predicted that it would literally go down like that. I mean, Jigsaw can do a lot of things. He is really smart, but he can't see the future. So that was one part of the movie where I was like, well, even within the Saw franchise, like I thought, like, this is a little bit silly. You know, I think that there were more clever things that they could have done, but it was still fun to watch, and it was still good to watch. But I still, once again, even this game that he locks him in, it still wasn't really all that bloody or gory. So there's really only probably 1 or 2 scenes in this entire movie that were actually like brutal. So, you know, in terms of the contraptions and everything, I would not say that this movie was, you know, the greatest in terms of that, in the blood and gore, but it was still very creative nonetheless. So the room starts filling up with gas, and then of course Cecilia ends up being the victor, and she ends up killing Parker, and she ends up winning the game. But then of course, like I said, they do also, like in the meantime, they do show sort of how, you know, Jigsaw sort of planned the whole thing the whole time, and, you know, they do show how he, you know, how he was anticipating them to do this, even though, like I said, I didn't really fully buy it. I didn't really buy into it. I didn't believe it. I did think that part of the movie was even too unbelievable, even for this type of movie. But whatever, it was still fun to watch. It was still really fun for to see Cecilia show her true colors and show who she really is. And of course, with that final game, that was pretty well how the game or how the movie ends. You know, it ends with Amanda and John and the child, the little boy, basically leaving the warehouse, and they are safe and sound, while leaving Cecilia up there in the room. So we don't really know her fate, but I do suspect that if they do another movie that, say, is a continuation of this specific storyline, then I do think that Cecilia will be in it again, and I do think that he would probably put her in another game, because she does sort of cheat in this movie, because the victim that we were talking about earlier, who had the chain on her right arm, or her left arm and her right leg, who end up being cooked with this giant heater. Well, she actually completes the game and she manages to escape, but Cecilia ends up killing her anyway. So I'm curious to know that if this story continues on in another Saw movie, would Cecilia be, you know, put back into the game for doing that, because she cheated and she killed someone who had won. And so, despite as bad as Jigsaw is, he still believes in, you know, the game. That's the whole reason why he does the game, because he believes in the game. So, you know, I will be curious to see if Cecilia would make an appearance again, if this story would continue on in Saw 11. I really hope to do. I would love to see a trilogy, an entire trilogy with Jigsaw in it. You know, I think it's a shame, really, that they killed him. You know, it's too bad earlier on in the movies they didn't do something where they were just like, you know, maybe it was like a wrong diagnosis, or the doctors diagnosed the wrong person or something. Like, I would have loved to see Jigsaw continue, you know, and I have no doubts that he will. I do think Tobin Bell will come back again, even for Saw 11 and 12. I do think they'll do a trilogy, or I hope they do a trilogy, you know, involving, you know, this part of his life in between the first and second movie. So that would be really cool to see. So that's pretty well how it ended. And then, of course, a character that during the whole movie you're kind of thinking, well, one of the characters that were a part of this game sort of ends up getting away, which is, of course, the character that led him to Cecilia from the support group. If you can remember, we were talking about all the way back at the beginning of the movie, that character, the gentleman who had the scars on his stomach. Well, it turns out that all those scars were fake, and he did not actually have scars on his stomach. That was just a part of the con. That was a part of the scam to get John into these fake doctors and into these scammers, and you sort of don't really see him anymore in the movie until you get to the mid-credit scene, which is, it's not really a post-credit scene, it's a mid-credit scene, and this is when Jigsaw ends up catching up to him, and I believe he said his name was Henry, and he ends up catching up to Henry, and he puts him in one of his contraptions, one of his devices, and that's how the mid-credit scene ends, with Henry now being in this device. And not only is he in the device, but he's actually back in the bathroom. I believe it was the same bathroom that took place in the very first Saw movie when the guy cuts off his leg. So it was a really cool callback, I think, to the beginning of the franchise. So that was really nice and really fun to see and also makes me think that maybe there will be a continuation of this story, and I absolutely hope that there do be. I would love to see Saw 11 carry on this story. The characters are awesome. I would love to see Amanda come back. I would love to see Hoffman come back, and it would be really cool to see the three of them working together even more, you know, because we sort of get glimpses of it throughout the whole franchise, but I don't know that we ever get to see them as close and as intimate as they are in this one. You know, like I said, Amanda and Jigsaw are actually in the room with the victims this time, which is something we haven't seen before. So it was really cool. You know, it was a really cool dynamic, and I thought that they did a really good job at showing that. And Amanda's, you know, you could tell that she's very new at this. She hasn't quite been able to swallow the pill on this whole idea yet. You know, she's getting there, and she's okay with participating in it, but she's not 100% behind it yet. So she's doing it, but she's not really behind it yet, if that makes sense. And she agrees to do it, but she can't really buy into it yet. But now, of course, we know from the rest of the franchise, she will buy into it eventually, because, you know, she continues on Kramer's work eventually. And so does Hoffman. So, and that's pretty well how Saw X ends. It ends with, you know, it ends with Celia being left in the room. It ends with John and Amanda and the kid leaving the warehouse. And then in the mid-credit scene, obviously, he ends up catching up to Henry, and then Henry ends up getting, you know, put into the contraption. So overall, I really loved this movie. I thought this was a great addition to the franchise. I was actually very blown away with it, because this is probably one of the movies that I've liked the most since the original trilogy. Now, there were other movies. I mean, I loved all the Saw movies, really, except maybe Saw 3D and Saw, or the movie that was just called Jigsaw. I thought they were the worst two movies of the whole thing, just because of how it become almost more science fiction-y as opposed to being realistic. Like Jigsaw, in the movie Jigsaw, I think they had lasers in that one, and I was like, okay, well, that's kind of weird and dumb. But this one really went back to the original Saw movie. This one really goes back to like a very real Saw. Like this is realistic. It's not science fiction-y. It's not fake. It's a very realistic. You know, the games are realistic. There's no lasers or anything. It's just, you know, steel and chains and saws and the typical blood and gore that you would expect. But it's, you know, it's very grounded. It's a normal reality, realistic movie, which is something that I'm very happy. I'm really happy that they got back to that. Like I said, with that small nitpick, the only thing that wasn't really all that believable was just the fact that I don't think that Jigsaw would have been able to predict that things would go exactly how they went. I don't know, maybe they would, maybe, I mean, he is intelligent, but I just don't know if it will be that realistic, if you know what I mean. So so it was still cool to see it, though. It's still a lot of fun, and I do absolutely think that Saw 10 is one of the best, not the best, but one of the best. I think that if I were to rate all the Saw movies, I think I'd probably give, I'd really have to take time, you know, to think about it all. And I still haven't seen Spiral, so maybe I'll watch Spiral tonight or tomorrow, just so that I can say that I've seen all 10. Spiral is the only one I haven't seen. I'm actually thinking about watching them all here on the channel anyways, and watching them, maybe we'll do it like during October or something, you know, leading up to Halloween or something like that, almost like an October special. Maybe we'll watch all 10 Saw movies, or well, 9 until the 10th one comes out, and then watch the 10th one when it comes out to own. But I think that I would say the first one was the best, and then probably the second, and maybe even the third. I really like the original trilogy, and then after that I probably would put this one there. I might have even actually liked this one more than the third one, but I do know that the first two were probably my favorites. Now that doesn't mean I didn't like the rest of them. You know, Saw 6 is really, really good, you know, and they're all really creepy. They all do stuff that is really, you know, unnerving to watch. But I do think that this one is definitely in the top 5. I might even be willing to say top 3, but if I went that far to saying that Saw 10 was my top 3, I would say that it's number 3, because I still like the first one the most, and the second one I think is very close to the first one. So I would say, yeah, I'd probably say about, I would say Saw X is, yeah, I would put it in definitely number 4 and maybe number 3. And like I said, I haven't seen Spiral yet, but from what I can gather, I'm probably not going to like it too much. Like I said, I even got Saw 3D and Jigsaw were the worst two that I didn't like, but the first two trilogies were pretty good. I can't complain about that. I did like the first two trilogies. The first one better, obviously, and I love this movie. I think, you know, I just kind of wish that they like done this type of movie sooner, but I have no doubts in my mind that Saw will continue probably for years. I just don't know what will happen when eventually when Tobin Bell wants to retire as Jigsaw, like when the actor himself no longer wants to play this role. It'll be very interesting to see what happens, because I think the first Saw movie came out in 2004. So I think it was 2004, the first Saw movie. So this franchise has been on the go for pretty well 20 years, and they got 10 movies, which makes sense because it's almost one every 2 years, because they did take a break in between them. I think it was Saw 1, 2, and 3, and then they went right up to 6, and then I think they sort of took a break. Then they went with Saw 3D, then they did Jigsaw and Spiral, and now they got Saw 10. So I'm really excited to see the future. I'm definitely pumped to see the next one, and I do hope that they continue this story. I would love to see Amanda and Hoffman and Jigsaw continue to work together, and I would like to see like a smaller, very well-grounded movie like this one. And it would be really cool if they flushed out the victims a little bit more as well. Like I said, this movie does a really good job at making you hate the victims. You know, despite the fact that he's about to torture them and kill them, you know, the characters are so unlikable that you're kind of rooting for Jigsaw. You know, you're kind of hoping that Jigsaw wins, which is probably the only other minor complaint that I would have about the movie, is that I feel like Cecilia never really got her justice, because she does survive, and not only did she survive, but she survived with very minimal, you know, very minimal damage. So I do hope that he ends up getting Cecilia again. And like I said, she did end up killing the person that played fairly, and the person that did survive, she ends up killing her. So I have no doubts in my mind that Jigsaw could end up going after her for cheating, and plus, like I said, plus the fact that she scammed so many people. But maybe not. Maybe the next story will continue on with Henry. I do think we'll see Henry again. I do think they'll probably show that. The fact that they even had a mid-credit scene tells me that they're going to probably want to continue the story with Tobin Bell, and probably Amanda's character, Shani something her name is. So I have no doubts in my mind that both of those characters will return. There's no reason for Shani not to return at all, because, you know, she's still relatively young. You know, she's still relatively young enough where she could probably still play the role for another, you know, 5 or 10 years. You know, well, I mean, she's not that old. I mean, she could play it for another probably 20 or 30 years. But you know what I mean? A lot of actors, they just sort of get sick of it after a while. So, but I suspect that she would probably be still willing to come around for another while. You know, a lot of the original Scream actors came back. You know, Courtney Cox came back. Who else? The Courtney Cox and the other lady came back. So I can't even remember her name now. And the guy that played Dewey, like, he came back. So it would be cool to see the original characters carry on. I would really like to see that. And I don't know, I just really liked it. I really thought Saw 10 was a great addition to the franchise, and honestly, I just can't wait to see where they go next. And yeah, I just can't wait to see it. Overall, you know, I think I gave this one a 75%, and you know what, I stand by it, and I got a feeling that if I see it a second time, I might even like it more. But I'm thinking I am going to rewatch the entire franchise, and then we'll throw this one in. I wonder what it would be like to watch it in chronological order, where we actually watch Saw 10 in between 1 and 2. That'd probably be a pretty cool idea, but I don't really know. I haven't done it. Like I said, I still got to watch Spiral 2, so I'll probably watch that tonight, maybe, or tomorrow, or some point in the very near future. I'll probably watch Spiral and all that good stuff. But yeah, but that's pretty well all I got for our open spoiler conversation for the Saw 10 brand new movie. I am going to be doing one of these conversations as well for the creator, so hopefully get that done tomorrow. Takes a long time to do these ones because they're such long formats, but there's not a whole lot of editing, so that's a good thing. Is really just you know, do, you know, just record the conversation and then put it on the podcast. So with that being said, if you're listening to this on the podcast, click that follow button, follow along the podcast, and if you're watching it on YouTube, click that subscribe button, and also leave a comment. Let me know in the description box or in the comment section if you liked this movie. Tell me your favorite parts. What was your best kill scene? What was your best part of Jigsaw? What was your best or favorite contraption? Let me know all that cool stuff in the description box down below, and that's pretty well all I got for you. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Hope you enjoyed the open spoiler conversation, and hopefully you'll join the conversation down below and all that good stuff. And that's pretty well all I got for you. So until the next video, take care.